Hello, everyone, and welcome to another episode of Sterling Live. My name is Caitlin Brower. I am Sterling's social media manager, and Sterling Live is our live show that we deliver to you every single week across Facebook, LinkedIn, and YouTube. And again, I am so happy to be back for another amazing episode. And I got to tell you guys, it is going to be an amazing episode because I have two wonderful guests with me. I have Katie Zwetzig, the Executive Director of Sterling Volunteers, and an external non-Sterling employee with us today. We have Mr. Toby Chalberg, who is the Chief Digital Officer at Points of Light. And today our topic is, we're going to do a check-in on the state of volunteerism. So again, great guests with me, but I'm going to allow them to introduce themselves to our audience. So Toby, I'm actually going to start with you. So can you go ahead and introduce yourself to our audience?
Hi, sure. Thanks, Caitlin. I'm Toby Chalberg. I'm the Chief Digital Officer at Points of Light. Points of Light is a nonprofit organization with a global footprint, and our mission is all about promoting and advancing volunteer engagement. And we do that through an affiliate network of about 250 organizations in major metro areas around the world, predominantly in the United States, but also in about 30 other countries. We work with companies on their employee engagement programs. Increasingly, employee volunteerism is an important part of a CSR strategy and a employee retention and engagement strategy. And we work with nonprofits to build their capacity to recruit and manage volunteers focused on a wide variety of issues, from homelessness and hunger to the environment to social justice issues in local communities through those affiliates in those communities that I mentioned. As Chief Digital Officer, I support our kind of digital enabled programming. And we support a number of products and platforms all around that theme of volunteer engagement, connecting people who are interested in helping with the organizations that need their help.
I love it. And thank you so much for joining us. Truly sounds like a phenomenal organization, Points of Light. Katie, passing it over to you. Can you please introduce yourself to our audience?
Sure. First, I just want to thank Toby for coming. I think this is going to be fun, Toby. So I'm Katie Zwetzig. I'm Executive Director of Sterling Volunteers. And our mission really is to build out communities of vetted volunteers and make sure that we have trusted and safe volunteers throughout our communities. And we do that largely through partnerships with folks like Points of Light. So happy to be here.
That's great. And again, to the two of you, thank you so much for joining me. Again, the topic, check-in on the state of volunteerism. So I do want to remind our audience, as we are live across Facebook, LinkedIn, and YouTube right now, you can ask questions to our guests. Katie and Toby are ready to answer your questions if you have any throughout the show. So what you'll do is you'll go into the comment section again across Facebook, LinkedIn, and YouTube, and you'll put your questions in there. I will then see them and I will field them to Katie and Toby as I see fit throughout the show. So don't be shy. Go ahead and ask your questions if you have any. So let's get into our episode today. So the first topic is just, generically talking about the state of volunteerism. So I wanted to start with the question, and Katie, we can start with you. What are we, just basic question, just what are we seeing when it comes to the state of volunteerism?
Yeah, well, I guess I'm really happy to report that we're seeing an uptick in volunteerism. So last year, I think we'd all like to forget parts of last year at least, but this year we're seeing kids get back on soccer fields and on basketball courts and sports and so forth, ramping up. Food delivery is still an important part of our network and our service network. And I'm really excited that schools are ramping up. So people are trying to figure out how this volunteering looks, and it certainly looks different than it did in 2020. And so we're helping them out there. The other thing I'd say, which I find interesting, is I think while people took a pause last year, they reevaluated their volunteer program and perhaps they lost some staff. And so we are seeing a huge uptick in those clients that want to integrate with volunteer management systems. And so it seems like nonprofits are driving that efficiency.
Toby, what are you guys seeing?
Well, I think certainly the past year has been an unprecedented one when it comes to volunteering. And I think even preceding the pandemic, there was always a little bit of a natural tension between the supply side and demand side of volunteering. What nonprofits needed from volunteers and what people were available and able and interested in doing. And I think that has sort of, been exacerbated in the pandemic. Obviously people not being able to join volunteer projects in person, still having an interest in helping the causes that they care about, wondering how they can do that virtually, but still participating in something virtually or remotely that makes an impact in the communities that they care about, namely their own. Mm-hmm. And so I think one trend that we're seeing, and I expect to continue to see, is that virtual or some sort of blend of being able to do things independently for organizations is kind of a here to stay condition, and nonprofits are figuring out a way to engage their supporters in those ways and kind of in perpetuity. And then on the corporate engagement side, I think I echo Katie's comments that things are returning. We're getting more and more calls from our corporate partners who, for the past 6+ months, we're finding other ways of engaging their employees in cause-related conversation, educational webinars and things like that. In some cases, some remote activities they could do, like on a Zoom call together or something like that. But now, I think a lot of companies are actually looking at a volunteer engagement as maybe one of the first things that a company can do to bring their teams back together. And I think, a lot of that's kind of being driven by the interest of the employees themselves. So I think that's an interesting kind of dynamic of in terms of the demographics of the volunteer base and the volunteer pool. I expect there to be a bit of a reset when it comes to all of that. Volunteers who may have been, loyal and recurring participants a year ago might not be coming back to those roles anytime soon. And so I know we're going to talk about recruitment later, but that there is a how can we fill the volunteer workforce, refill it, and with whom?
Yeah, it's great to hear that we're seeing an uptick in volunteering and that it's coming back and it's on the rise. That's such great news to hear. And then also, I do love the example, Toby, that you provided of, companies wanting to re-engage employees, and some of the ideas is what can we do from a volunteer standpoint? It's like, what are some activities we can do there to, move it forward? So I love that example for sure. So Katie, you touched briefly upon, certain sectors. I know you brought up athletics, education, but are we seeing any other specific sectors picking up and really ramping up with volunteers?
Yeah, well, if I think about the timeline of a year, it really starts in the spring with kids' sports in the spring. And that's why we're in the throes of soccer registration and basketball registration and mountain biking registration and so forth. And I think as a precursor to what we believe is coming are the schools that are starting to ramp up. They shut down largely last year. And so we are getting very involved with our school clients, our K through 12 in particular, who are looking for ways to efficiently onboard volunteers and safely as well. And so I think Toby hit on this too. Virtual volunteering is here to stay. And I think organizations are looking for ways where they can hang on to those volunteers in a way that is meaningful for them. And so just seeing it really across the board.
Yeah, that's great. And, Toby, you had touched upon the corporate side of things, and you did mention in your introduction, the CSR side of Points of Light. So I am interested, if you do have any more, information or insight in regards to CSR programs right now, like where are the opportunities? Has there been a shift? Like, what is the state of that right now?
One of the initiatives that we're leading at Points of Light right now is a conversation about racial justice, particularly as it relates to how people of goodwill come to communities to be a volunteer, to be a supporter, and companies are having that conversation as well. You see that on a variety of fronts, and our long-standing partners who've worked with us on employee engagement are, I think, more kind of hyper aware of that question when it comes to their employee engagement programs and their volunteer programs. That is a interesting new thread of dialogue and program design that companies are working through. that's both about like what kind of community projects and organizations they might be looking to support, but also kind of how they set the table for inviting their employees to participate in whatever it is they're doing. Again, hybrid or virtual team engagement will remain, I think for companies, an important trend. There's always a little bit of a ebbing and flowing between for companies between let's create sort of the company's impact agenda and align all the things our employees, or we invite our employees to do to those goals and objectives, versus letting 1,000 flowers bloom and let every employee kind of pick their own project of interest and count those activities as well. And so I think that's still happening, and it may have kind of trended towards the latter side in this past year, since people haven't been able to come together to do things as teams. But so that'll probably continue to grow.
So I think that's a perfect segue into where I want to go with this conversation, because the two of you brought up, virtual volunteering, and then Toby, you had just mentioned hybrid model for volunteering. So that's why I want to shift the conversation. So, thank you both. I think it was a great overview of the state of volunteerism, of where we stand today. But I kind of want to get into more detailed areas now, more detailed topics. So the first one is, I do want to talk about a hybrid volunteer community, and I want to talk about how we can amplify the engagement there in a model that is hybrid. So the first question I do ask, or do I have, and I'll kick it off to you, Katie, to start. So what is the impact on retaining volunteers?
Well, obviously bringing on a new volunteer bringing them on takes more effort than keeping a volunteer, right? Just an employee. And so I think what we've seen with organizations over the last year is they worked very, very hard to keep those volunteers, and they upped their social media, they upped their outreach, and really put them into their network of their organization. And we're starting to see that pay off, because many volunteers, their programs have not lagged from a number of volunteers. So those volunteers are still available. One of the things I love about virtual volunteering and what happened last year is it broke down geographical barriers. So the example I love to give is, you take somebody like one of our partners, Meals on Wheels, and they have volunteers in New Jersey reaching out to shut-ins in Colorado. So where it used to be I could only go and volunteer within my community, it's really opened things up. And I think that's been great for the volunteers, obviously great for the recipients of those services, and great for the organizations as a whole.
Yeah, I think that's a great example, and it's definitely it's one I've volunteered with Meals on Wheels before in New Jersey, so I think it's a great example because it's true, and it does open more opportunity. Maybe some people were strict on timing or couldn't make a trip somewhere. So now when it's virtual, it's right in front of your face. The opportunities are there. So I'm really happy you brought that up for sure. Toby, anything to add on retaining volunteers?
Well, I want to kind of piggyback on the Meals on Wheels example. It's that's sort of an example of the call center, phone banking approach to volunteer engagement. And we actually saw that as being a very popular and somewhat turnkey and easy way for nonprofits to give their volunteers something to do that was meaningful and had real value in exactly that model that Katie just mentioned. So, there was a lot of kind of easy to use and sometimes free kind of phone banking software platforms out there that will integrate with the CRM. So I was kind of, inspired by that and curious if there's a way that we might use that almost like, reverse wellness checks back into our volunteer pool and, talking about opportunities that might be coming up and how they might be able to re-engage, getting some feedback and intelligence from them on, what are the barriers that they have, what interest do they have in coming back as a volunteer, and perhaps kind of pre-scheduling, some engagement in the future.
Yeah, another great example for sure. And I think to kind of, let's keep on the example train here, because I think our audience does like to hear prime examples. So for the two of you, any other examples you have of current like virtual, remote, and then also in-person volunteer activities that are going on right now, that are thriving right now? So I'll kind of, this is the one I'll toss up to the two of you. Either one of you can answer it right now.
Yeah, well, I have one, Toby, and then you probably have multitudes. But I do think that like mentoring programs and Big Brothers Big Sisters in particular really took advantage of the situation last year, and they rebuilt out their platform so that they could have mentoring online and keep track of those interactions between a big and a little. And so they took some time to revamp that, and I think it's been very, very successful. So there's still, of course, if you're wanting someplace to volunteer, they're always looking for bigs.
Yeah,
but, they've gotten very efficient in how they do that.
An example from our affiliate network, they're sort of issue agnostic and kind of go where the need for volunteer organizing and management exists, and usually when that need exists at some large scale, like a disaster. So certainly the COVID vaccine and testing delivery over the past number of months has been a place where a lot of volunteers have been invited to support. I know in my own personal experience, for the 300-yard walk from the parking deck to the clinic, I engaged with a volunteer every 15 yards or so. So our affiliates are supporting very sort of lightweight and kind of non-skilled required volunteer positions to support that in partnership with county health departments. I think similarly to that, that's actually also happening at a kind of a hyper local level. Any kind of organization that's centered around a naturally established community, whether it's your school or YMCA, are organizing things like that, whether it be formal vaccine delivery or testing or other emergency food delivery, and those are all things that are inviting in-person volunteer engagement. So if you're looking for that type of experience, I think a good first place to start is with the Points of Light affiliate network in your community. You can find your local nearest affiliate at our website.
Yeah. So what I love about sharing these true examples, these real-time examples too, is showcasing to our audience the amount of opportunities that are out there right now, whether you do want to volunteer in person somewhere with maybe something like the vaccine distribution, which we will actually touch upon in a little bit, or even something remote, taking on a role with Big Brothers, Big Sisters, and maybe it's through the computer, it's through something else. So again, I truly love sharing these examples because it does just showcase how much opportunity there is to volunteer out there. So when we look at volunteers themselves, I'm curious just to know what kind of feedback, we're hearing from these individuals for hybrid models, for just strictly remote, or now as we move to more in-person activities. So would love to know if the two of you are hearing feedback from specific volunteers. Toby, I can start with you.
I can provide some sort of analytics behind what that we can interpret as being, kind of what the volunteer interest is.
Yeah.
By orders of magnitude, the top pages of the Points of Light website over the past number of months have been our resources around virtual volunteering. We have a volunteer discovery platform called Points of Light Engage, which is sort of a catalog of volunteer opportunities to browse and explore and search by keyword and distance from your location. And their virtual or online or some version of that search term has been the top search term of interest for the last number of months. And so I think that tells me, without sort of anecdotal feedback or actual direct feedback from any particular person, that that interest remains high. And also I think people are interested in those opportunities, not just for themselves, but for some on behalf of some group, their family, or their some group that they are starting to gather and congregate with, but they want to support some cause. And it's a real hopeful sign, I think, that people are still leaning into wanting to help, and that has not subsided at all, at least on a volunteer interest perspective, it seems.
Yeah, it's great to hear that. Katie, anything to add?
Yeah, I mean, I think we saw the same thing in talking to our volunteer network. And so there are some resources on our website where we partner with Beth Steinhorn, and she's done some webinars on retention and recruitment of volunteers that have been very, very well received. I echo what Toby said. I don't think that in the last year, the desire to volunteer waned. I think how we volunteer and finding those opportunities was really the challenge. And I applaud Points of Light and Volunteer Match and so forth, those partners of ours that helped connect volunteers to engaging opportunities.
Yeah, and listen, honestly, if you're watching live right now and you have volunteered over the past year or so, definitely provide your feedback. We'd love to hear it, and we can also share it live right now. So yeah, again, truly great, to hear these examples, these stats, especially, the pages from the Points of Light website, where people are going. They're still interested in volunteering for themselves, for groups. Truly, truly great to hear. So let's go in. So Toby, I know you touched on your vaccine experience and coming into contact with volunteers every step of the way. So let's dive into that a little bit deeper. So nonprofit organizations and volunteer organizations, how are they helping with COVID health testing, how are they implementing COVID health testing, but then helping with the vaccine distribution? So the first question, Katie, we can start with you. So how are these organizations helping with vaccine distribution?
So for us, we've worked with a network in our customer base, mostly health services, but also affiliates and volunteer centers, many of which are the Points of Light affiliates that Toby mentioned. And they're doing vaccine delivery in stadiums, in parking lots, and so forth, and obviously for the health systems in the hospitals. So we've been able to do that, and we've worked with a couple of our VMS partners to make that workflow streamlined for those individuals, and added in some products that support what they want to do as far as safety of their volunteers. So we're happy to help, and it's been fun. Toby, you probably, I mentioned the network, but you probably have more examples of your affiliate network.
I mentioned those kind of large-scale logistical operations. I think in addition to that, smaller nonprofits that have sort of constituencies that they're focused on delivering services to, I think are paying close attention to the health and safety and wellness of those clients and constituents, and may have volunteer support needs, whether it's kind of client-oriented casework around getting vaccinations or getting scheduled, helping people get to their appointments, or even scheduling appointments, for people who aren't online. And so those are sort of the two ends of the spectrum. Large scale kind of logistical operations, and more personalized walking people through the process to getting vaccinated.
Yeah, so volunteers really, moving us forward to get that distributed. So, again, something that's truly great for our audience to hear right now. So for COVID-19 testing, because that doesn't just disappear, it's still, people are implementing these programs, whether it's at a corporate level or they're at for volunteer NPOs, things like that. So I am curious, is that still, happening? Are these organizations still implementing COVID-19 health testing? Katie, we can start with you.
Yeah, for our network, then yes. Although I think as there's been some in-home testing capabilities, we're starting to see some of that shift. So for instance, in the state of Colorado now offers in-home testing to teachers, and they just mail them out to the teachers. So there's some efficiency that has been driven.
Toby, anything to add?
I think it's largely kind of dependent, probably goes without saying, dependent on, and conditional on, how the organization is considering bringing back volunteers.
Right.
I think a fairly standard practice and common is sort of self-disclosure about recent exposure, and perhaps if there's something as sustained engagement that looks almost like you're a paid teacher in the classroom, might some sort of ongoing testing requirement be necessary. But I don't see a lot of nonprofits kind of getting to that level of recurring engagement of volunteers yet, at least not at any large scale.
Yeah, well, listen, there's opportunities out there to volunteer. We have to make sure we are doing it safely, and everyone is healthy, and that we can, keep these opportunities coming for sure. So shifting gears a little bit to volunteer recruitment. So we did touch on this a little bit earlier. We also touched on retaining volunteers, but given the shift, there's been a lot of shifts going on over the past year, so recruitment strategies might be a little different. I do want to point this question directly for you, Toby. Katie, if you do obviously have anything to add, please do. But what is the state of nonprofit organizations, and how are they rethinking their recruitment strategies right now?
Well, I think, one way I think about Points of Light's mission, I kind of boil it down to, making a commitment to be able to answer the question, how can I help? That's essentially what's behind, all of those visits to our website looking for virtual volunteer opportunities. We did some research last year, coincidentally, right when the pandemic was unfolding, some kind of public consumer research around people's attitudes and interest in civic engagement more broadly, and volunteering in particular. And kind of two big findings of that. One was, as we've talked about already, a ton of goodwill and interest in getting involved, but on the other side of the ledger, some common barriers that people cited to kind of manifesting that intent, and the top kind of responses to those barriers, I'd kind of all put in the same bucket of kind of failure in the information marketplace, like lack of certainty or clarity on where I can go to find opportunities, not being able to find things near me that fit my schedule, not knowing exactly what I can do. And so we're really trying to tackle that problem at Points of Light on the kind of discovery side, and hope that it's a solution that can help and can be a component part of the nonprofit recruitment strategy. And in particular, I mentioned Points of Light Engage is the volunteer catalog. We're really kind of leaning into digital discovery for those volunteer opportunities. The most common kind of practice for someone looking for something is to go to Google and type in volunteer near me, or volunteer with whatever cause, animals or whatever. And we want to be able to deliver the best results of that search versus needing to know to go to Points of Light to look for that opportunity, or your local volunteer center. So that's one of the projects that I'm working on to
that's exciting.
That problem. But that's again on the the proactive looking for things.
Yeah. No, that's really exciting, and I think that's a great example for sure. Definitely.
And I think there's a ton of other things that nonprofits need to be doing, or can be doing kind of on their more proactive outreach side of things as well.
Yeah, no, that's great. Katie, do you have anything to add in regards to, shifting recruitment strategies, current, strategies in place?
No, I think Toby hit on it, but Toby, I am curious, as you mentioned at the top of the program about supply and demand, do you see those getting more in sync? And what's your feel on opportunities versus number of volunteers to fulfill those?
I don't know if it'll ever be kind of, in good equilibrium. But and I know a lot of organizations, are trying to be thoughtful and mindful about how they might adjust their volunteer roles and opportunities to account for things like an interest in episodic volunteering. Not every organization can make those types of adjustments and shifts, but Just as an example, the Girl Scouts, has had very, robust volunteer engagement and a really great model for exactly what volunteers are needed and how many are needed in order to, deliver their services and their programs to girls. And they're looking at sort of on the margins, kind of creating, more episodic engagement opportunities that could kind of, help convert to some of those more traditional roles, but kind of diversifying their offerings to achieve that.
That's great. So moving into our final topic of the episode, we're talking about volunteers. These are NPOs, like the greatest asset. And, these are the people that are out there serving these organizations' mission and, really delivering what matters. So when we look at these volunteers, it's on these organizations to make sure that they're building and delivering trust and safety. So I want to touch on that a little bit. So Katie, I'll come to you because this question is specifically around, what Sterling brings to the table, what Sterling does. So can you provide an overview of background screening and identity services for volunteers? And have we seen any changes in this area?
Sure. So by and large, Caitlin, most of our clients run, one of three packages, and they all entail a Department of Justice sex offender, so that's important, a criminal check. And then our system offers some monthly updates, which is really nice, and alerts for that. Over the pandemic time and since then, we have seen an upgrade in some of those product offerings and people wanting to add a little bit more as people move to a virtual situation. So we've seen more reference checks. You touched a little bit on COVID testing. Sterling offers COVID testing, and we did have quite a few nonprofits that started that testing with us, which was great to see. We also have had an identity piece where people, if you're in a virtual volunteering and you don't have an opportunity to meet that volunteer face to face, how do I know that that volunteer who's showing up to coach a soccer team is really the volunteer that I screened? And so we have an identity piece that we rolled out, and then Sterling just rolled out a really great partnership, an exclusive partnership with ID.me, which brings our previous identity offering, it just puts it on steroids. So we're really excited about that as well.
It's very exciting for sure. Our live audience too, definitely, scan Sterling's website, our profile, our social media profiles if you need to learn more about that partnership, because I think exciting is probably a light way to put it, but it's truly great. I'm very happy that it's, putting a lot of emphasis in helping, our Sterling volunteer sector for sure.
Because that's always been the question is how do I know that the volunteer I screened is the volunteer that shows up? And there's ways to do that traditionally, but identity really flips the corner on that.
Yep. And as we said before, we want to make sure we're volunteering, in a safe and healthy way. We also want to make sure too that it's, the right volunteers, we're getting the job done in a good and safe, positive manner. So a lot of good stuff there for sure. So let's touch on partnerships a little bit. Toby, I'll send this question over to your way. So when it comes to trust and safety and the importance of it, why are partnerships in this space really geared towards that trust and safety? And why does it make that trust and safety so important?
Well, I think, every nonprofit, has fewer resources than they need to achieve their mission and goals and change the world the way that they, aspire to. And so partnerships are really, kind of high leverage way of dividing the work and getting things done. And at the end line of that, of a volunteer, providing for the best possible volunteer experience so that, they can make a difference, feel good about the difference that they made, tell others about it, keep coming back. And so I think the ID.me, partnership is a great example of, leveraging the strengths and assets of a partner to bring new value to the sector and solve a problem, ease some of that friction in the process and in the confidence building process of identifying and onboarding a volunteer. And then ultimately, I think, especially now that we're thinking about reopening and re-engaging volunteers, I think organizations should really think about, what is it about their volunteer programs that people loved so much? Was it a social experience because they could do this in groups or meet new people? Was it because the organization serves a client base that was, provided a really meaningful new relationships for their volunteers? Was it the work that they got to do? Was it, a nice physical outlet for doing something? Was it the place or the environment in which that they were participating in that activity? And really kind of lean into that great asset, that great component of the volunteer experience, and remind folks about how meaningful that was, or maybe there's 2 or 3 of those components. I think that's, I think what's going to resonate with people and can help in that volunteer recruitment that we were talking about, sort of a marketing, dimension to that volunteer invitation.
Yeah, and it's such a good and detailed response because, like you said in the beginning, we're all trying to achieve this end goal and make the world a better place, and delivering good and to bring on partners, to get us there is truly great. And I do love seeing, how many partners come into play when it comes to Sterling Volunteers. Just seeing, what we're doing out there, who we're partnering with. So, Katie, I would love to get your insight on this question as well.
Yeah, I think my response would be similar to Toby's. Where we sit is in, the trust and safety. And that's really what we want to do. And we do it very, very well. So partnering with folks like Points of Light, who has been our mission partner really since before we started. I mean, we've been, going in parallel with Points of Light for 7 years now, and other partners. And we want them to bring in other things that would help build out that community of vetted volunteers on Points of Light. Situation. There's a lot of content and content offering and finding opportunities and so forth. And we have other opportunities and partnerships that are for volunteer engagement and efficiency and so forth. So yeah, we're going to sit squarely in the background screening and do that very well, but really excited to offer some of that robust offering through our partner network. So looking at, for instance, on ID.me, Toby and I have had plenty of conversations on how that can fit into the Engage platform.
Awesome. All right. So at this time, I do want to remind our audience across Facebook, LinkedIn, and YouTube that you can ask questions for Katie and Toby. You'll go into the comment section across these platforms and go ahead and add your questions. As we wait for potential questions to come in, we are 37 minutes into this episode, and I got to tell you, the two of you have delivered such great content, such great insight for our audience. So I do thank you for that. I want to gather some final thoughts. From the two of you. It could be in regards to our discussion today. It could just be, the overview of the state of volunteerism, really just what you want to, finally give our audience as we end this episode. So Toby, we can start with you for final thoughts.
Well, I think, first of all, thank you for the invitation. It's a great dialogue. And for those listening, I hope you found it useful and in some cases helpful and inspiring. And if so, please, we welcome your volunteer interest. And hopefully we can solve that or answer that question of how you can help at Points of Light. That's goes for an individual or a group of friends or family looking for something, a company looking to engage their employees, and the nonprofits who are looking to build their capacity to engage more volunteers in this coming year and beyond.
Yes, and I will definitely go ahead. So our audience can see after the show. I'll have links to both of our websites on here for both Sterling Volunteers and Points of Light. And also too, Toby and Katie are tagged on these pages. So if you have any questions for them, you can also ask them directly. But thank you for that, Toby. Katie, final thoughts from today.
Yeah, I mean, I think for me, I go back to that supply conversation with Toby, and certainly we need more volunteers. The world needs more volunteers, and so there are plenty of opportunities out there on Engage and even through a Google search to find where to get engaged and plugged in. I'm really, really grateful for the nonprofits, especially the ones that we work with, that they weathered the storm last year. There was incredible collaboration between nonprofits and corporations and communities, governments, and so forth. And so I'm so excited about the uptick. I know that they went through a lot last year, and just grateful that that they're coming back.
I'm excited about the uptick as well, and I'm very excited about this episode. The two of you, again, thank you so much. This was truly engaging. It was truly insightful. And for me, optimistic that volunteering is on the rise. There are so many opportunities, virtually. There's new opportunities in person. We're talking about how we can do it safely. We can do it in a healthy way, and we can really give back, a lot and really, really deliver good to the world. So such an amazing conversation. So I do thank the two of you for joining me today. I thank our audience who tuned in live across Facebook, LinkedIn, and YouTube. And if you're catching it on demand, thank you for watching. We hope you had an amazing time, just like I did. I truly had a great time. But that is our show for today. So thank you to both so much. And thank you to our audience. And we will see you next time on Sterling Live. So thank you.
Thank you.